glaring communications glitch. Or I remember from another incident where they were frantically looking to identify who was the point of contact for the incident response teams to deal with. They had brought in an external team, but when they came in and they were looking to talk to one or two people, not everybody, they were not sure who they were. So I've come across a couple of such instances. Just curious from your experiences, what have you seen in terms of a glaring weakness?
One of the big consistencies across organizations is that at the C-suite level, you have people that generally are used to giving orders. When there's an incident, they all have opinions about what to do. Those opinions could be completely different. And a good C-suite will debate and disagree and then come up with a single strategy and execute that. What I've seen happen multiple times, though, is, they debate, they disagree. The CEO thinks that there's a strategy and others on the C-suite don't. And so they set their teams off to do different things in different ways with different ends in mind. It's not hard to see how that could be completely counterproductive. You've got maybe a compliance team that's talking to the regulator saying one thing. You've got an IT team that's doing something completely different. Then when the regulators start asking questions about, all right, well, prove that what you're telling us is true, and you can't because the IT team has actually done something absolutely different from what you told the regulators was going to happen. It comes out in communications to impacted individuals too, right? We told the customers we were going to do X, but we didn't. Why didn't we do X? That is really a theme that I wish wasn't true, but it is a theme that I've seen many times where the C-suite just disagrees and they never get to that point of saying, all right, this is our strategy, period. If you disagree, fine, but keep that disagreement to yourself outside this room. That can be completely destructive to a company and their prospects of actually getting through an incident resilient, because you want to be able to be resilient, right? You're going to get hit, you want to get back up and keep doing business, but you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you're not acting with one voice at the C-suite level.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series with Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is the author of the book Cybersecurity Readiness, a holistic and high-performance approach, a Sage publication. He has been studying cybersecurity for over a decade, authored and edited scholarly papers, delivered talks, conducted webinars and workshops, consulted with companies, and served on a cybersecurity SWAT team with Chief Information Security Officers. His work on proactive cybersecurity has been featured on USA Today. Dr. Chatterjee has been a tenured professor at the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. As a Duke University visiting scholar, Dr. Chatterjee teaches in the cybersecurity programs at the Pratt School of Engineering.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Today, we are exploring what it really means to lead under fire. Those moments when a cyber crisis hit, the clock is ticking and the stakes couldn't be higher. My guest is Josh Cook, an experienced cybersecurity privacy attorney and leader who has faced down high-pressure incidents and come out the other side with lessons worth sharing. Josh, it's great to have you here.
Dave, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, as I like to do with every episode, I'd like my guest to share some professional highlights with my listeners.
Sure. So I started my career in litigation, primarily helping individuals who had been the victims of financial fraud, financial crime. And from there, I moved in-house, where I continued focusing on the individuals, on the customers. That led me to become heavily involved in privacy and cybersecurity issues because, the bad guys go where the money is, right?
Yep.
So ultimately, I became the first Global Cyber Counsel for a Fortune Global 500 company, and I built that cyber legal function from scratch. And then I left there after about a dozen years and really wanted to bring that multinational, multi-billion dollar corporation experience to the small and mid-sized companies that don't have access generally to people like me, but they absolutely need access because for a small and mid-sized company, a cyber attack can be an existential crisis.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something. You talked about building the cyber legal function. Share with us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so having been part of a large multinational organization, it probably won't surprise you to hear that there were a lot of different people around the world doing similar jobs that had never talked to each other, never met, didn't know that each other existed. And so that was one of the first things that I did, basically because of the way it was structured. When a cyber incident or a privacy incident had come up before I took over, the lawyer that was attached to that business would take a leadership role and help shepherd it through the whole process. But at the end of that incident, they would just go back to their daily job. And there was no institutional knowledge being gained or maintained. There was no consistency across geographies or even within a geography across business units. So that was one of the first things that I had to do was make sure that we were acting with a single purpose. And so I wrapped my arms around everybody globally and said, all right, let's meet, let's talk, let's figure out who's doing what. Can we learn from each other? Are we doing something in Japan that we are not doing in the US? And how can we make each other better? So that was kind of step one. And then step two was figuring out where are the gaps in our global strategies. So things that at the time, very simple things like an executive ransomware playbook. Right? When we're hit with a ransomware attack, what are the executives going to be asked to do? And what decisions are they going to be called on to make? And then, let's think those things through before the incident so that we can make better decisions in the heat of the moment. And so that was really what it boiled down to, making sure everyone was doing the same thing, pulling in the same direction, not working at cross purposes, and creating strategies that the company globally could follow.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, the reason that term piqued my interest, cyber legal function, I was recently talking to a company and they were wanting my guidance, my expertise. And one of the first questions I asked them is how involved is legal in the formulation, oversight, and execution of your cybersecurity strategy? When I asked that question, the responses are kind of varied. Sometimes I get the impression that legal is not at all involved. They get involved when crisis happens. And sometimes I get the impression that there has been some legal input during the strategy formulation process, but it's not a consistent oversight. Let's put it that way. And I've always felt that at the end of the day, or if something were to happen and the organization ultimately has to go to a court of law, and you need your legal folks to defend you, to represent you, why not involve them from the get-go? And especially when you're trying to design a superior cybersecurity program. So this to me sounds like a no-brainer, but the reality seems different. I go back to the same question again. What have you seen?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I will tell you, the whole process fares much better when the lawyers are involved early. And that doesn't just mean early on in an incident, but in the preparation phase as well, right? If the lawyers are there to help steer the conversation, to help guide those kind of inflection points during an incident, the lawyers can really be a critical component. And it's not just the legal perspective. That is an important piece of it because lawyers view the world in a different way, right? And certainly different from technologists and IT professionals. But it's not just that, the perspective, it's that lawyers can assert privilege. We can create this opportunity to share information freely without worrying that it's going to leave the building, right? So because of that attorney-client privilege, and during an incident, sometimes you get into the work product doctrine, but that attorney-client privilege can really be liberating in allowing executives and IT teams to say, all right, we're just going to open it up and really brainstorm about what could happen, where are our real risks, And let's just be open and honest about it because we need some legal guidance here. And that's really the key component to asserting privilege. But that can be really liberating and allow a company to actually find things that they can fix, as opposed to what I've seen happen more than once, where companies are like, let's just not deal with it. If we pretend it's not there, then we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to allocate resources to it. It's just, this is a really low risk problem. And it turns out, maybe it wasn't as low risk as they thought. So it would be much better to have that open dialogue early.
We recently authored a paper, a colleague of mine and I. It's titled Ignorance is Not Bliss. And it kind of aligns with what you just said, that you can either take the approach that let's not worry about it too much. When it happens, we'll deal with it. It's essentially taking that approach that ignorance is bliss. Or alternatively, get your head in and try to understand the different types of risks that are already in existence or that might come to play at some point in time, and develop methods, measures, action items so that you are prepared, well prepared. That brings up my next question for you. And that goes back to experiencing a cyber incident, being at the heart of it. Through your experiences, if feasible, share with listeners, do a comparative evaluation between a company that had proactively prepared and a company that had not proactively prepared. What differences did you observe, if that's possible?
Yeah. It's a great question because the companies that don't actively prepare, I draw the analogy to, a student taking a test, right? You can take the test without studying. You might pass. You might do really well. But if you do, that's kind of a happy accident, right? So why not stack the deck in your favor and prepare and study and get ready for it so that you're actually able to handle those things with some confidence. And that's really one of the key differences between the companies that are prepared and the companies that are not, is that confidence, that lack of panic for the prepared company, because they have, whether they've faced a live incident or not, if they're prepared for it, they feel ready. And so, that panic level really goes down. I use the OODA loop, which is fighter pilots have been trained on this OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, right? And when I'm dealing with clients, they're not, even if they're ready, they're not preparing for an incident day in, day out the way the military does. So, I add in breathe. So I call it the B-OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. And once you have that framework under your belt, it's much easier to say, all right, what is actually important? What am I looking at here? And it's those companies that go through that process that can handle it much easier. The companies that are not prepared, like I said, maybe they go through and with flying colors, and that's fantastic. Good for them, right? But it also gives them the false sense of confidence that next time is going to be the same. And it will not be the same. I mean, that's lightning hitting the same place twice. It's just not going to happen.
Very true. In fact, talking about frameworks, one of the frameworks that I recommend, that's an empirically validated framework that comes from my research, it's called the Commitment, Preparedness, Discipline Framework, CPD framework. And essentially, it's about the leadership, the organizational members, the service providers making a commitment to do their part to secure the organization, to secure the sensitive data. Because as you will appreciate, security cannot be achieved, or if you want to get to a high level, when it comes to a strong security posture, unless everyone is doing their part, especially in a global organization like you just shared, that you have found instances where units are doing things, but they haven't really talked to each other. So it helps to have a more coordinated, cohesive approach to security preparedness. So commitment is really about being hands-on, even the leadership. Like the other day, I got a phone call from the CEO of the company who wanted my guidance on how to prepare their organization going forward. So I told him, I said, you know what? You've checked the most important box in my framework, and that is you have taken the initiative, you've come on the line along with your leadership team, but you want to be in the game. And that is so important. So that's commitment. Preparedness is when you get into the nuts and bolts of the different things you have to do to secure the networks, to secure the devices, to secure people through training, talking about, planning incident response, rehearsing incident response, engaging in tabletop exercises. They're all a part of preparedness. And I want to echo what you said. It's so important to actively prepare. And again, here I'll try to sound like a lawyer, though I'm not, but hopefully you will cover for me. I've spoken to a few other lawyers. I've spoken to a judge, I believe, a while back, and they told me that in a court of law, the judge or the jury is looking to see if the organization has made a reasonable effort, given their resources, to secure themselves. So I took that and I said, how about going above and beyond? How about getting legal involved and sharing with them how you're approaching your cybersecurity preparedness, creating literally a checklist and asking them for their input and what's missing. So if you are proactive in that approach, and if you keep them in the loop in terms of what are you trying to secure, how are you trying to secure, and what are you doing on a consistent basis to monitor the state of security, I think that would be a very substantive endeavor. And if you maintain good records, then that would go to show that this organization has been doing their best to secure themselves. So maybe they might have a better chance in not being accused of gross negligence. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back to you, Josh. Your thoughts and reactions.
Yeah, no, you're spot on there. I think to go back just a sec on the commitment piece, commitment to me, it's entirely top down, right? It has to be led by leadership. They have to demonstrate that this is important, and it takes resources, it takes time and money and effort. And I think for most business people, if you said, well, you could spend $100,000 now and it would save you $2 million later, right? That's a no-brainer. But because that $2 million expenditure later is really an unknown time, spending that $100,000 now is actually a really hard thing for most business leaders to do. And so that's really commitment. That is taking that unknown future savings and saying, you know what, we need to focus on this today because we know it's going to happen. We just don't know when, but it's going to happen and we need to be ready. So that to me is commitment. You talk about preparedness, and I couldn't agree more. One of the key components to preparedness is tabletop exercises, and it's practicing, right? It's practicing what's going to happen during an incident. And to me, you need an incident response plan, of course. You need to have a framework to be able to handle when an incident happens. But the plan itself is not the key component. It's how you create the plan. Right. And to me, it's the planning process and how that plan comes about and how it is refined over time. That's really the important piece, because if you've got a static plan, and you're only pulling it off the shelf during an incident, that's not doing you any good. But it's really the act of planning and getting ready for an incident. That is where you develop the muscle memory. And that's where, importantly, you identify the people in your organization that are actually going to be responsible for doing certain things. I can't tell you how many times I've run a tabletop exercise and I hear from a manager, okay, well, we're going to do that. And I say, well, who's going to do that? Well, Dave's going to do that. Okay, where's Dave? Well, Dave's at his desk. Okay, does Dave know that he's supposed to be doing this? Well, no, I mean, no one's ever told him that, right? So it's really just like, that's where you get to the nuts and bolts of how does this process work? And there's certainly a massive technical component to it, but a lot of it is just the people that are involved and getting them familiar with what they're going to have to do in the heat of the moment.
Absolutely. I just came back from a cybersecurity conference where I heard an interesting incident shared by one of the participants. In the context of tabletop exercises, they were trying to get a tabletop exercise going. And when it came to everyone doing their part, some of the participants felt, oh, I get it. Okay, I know what to do when it happens. And then immediately the response was, no, we have to do it all now. We're going to assume that we've been hit by a ransomware attack. Our systems are down. So each one of you get off from what you were doing and start performing your role. So it's not a theoretical exercise where you review a document, you look at it and you say, okay, I get it. I know how to implement. Once in a while, I like to bring in the tennis metaphor. I don't care how much I show you a technique or you visualize something. They're all important parts of learning. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately, you have to go and hit that ball. And you have to hit that ball the right way numerous times before you start building muscle memory. And we're talking about developing muscle memory from a cybersecurity standpoint. And I think you hit upon something extremely significant. Ultimately, it's the people. Whatever the technology, whatever the process, it's people who have to execute. It's people who have to act. And unless you train them well, there's something I read, and I don't know if you agree. They said that when you're in the midst of a crisis incident and you're leading the incident response effort, how you behave, how you act has an impact on the other. In other words, if you're all frantic, panic-stricken, going helter-skelter, calling each and everybody, that is very contagious. On the other hand, if you are calm, collected, and that's because you're prepared, not because you're ignorant. You're calm and collected because you know what you're doing. That has a positive vibe. And that's a huge part of the incident response experience. Now here, I don't want to preach to the choir here. You do a lot of this. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so maybe about a year ago or so, I wrote a book, The Cyber Resilience by Design, The Executive's Guide to Managing a Cyber Attack. And one of the chapters in that book talks about how to select outside counsel. And the reason why it's important, as a leader facing a cyber incident, it takes some self-reflection to understand what you are able to do and how your personality impacts the team around you. And the reason why I laugh is because if you are the kind of leader that is active, go, 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 you need an outside force, you need outside counsel to be the opposite, to calm that down, right? So that idea that your leadership style may be fantastic during daily operations, and it might actually be a hindrance in an incident. And so you really need that calm demeanor during an incident because everyone is clamoring for an answer, right? How did this happen? What do we do? What's next? Are they still in the system? What data was compromised? How is this going to impact our customers? There's a million questions that are all coming at you rapid fire. The way to handle it is to slow it all down. And you cannot overreact. You cannot be hyper responsive. You need to be very deliberate in how you handle these things. And the team around you will catch that, right? They will start to understand, okay, we're not responding to every single stimuli. We have to kind of put it all into the hopper and figure out, is this important or not? And how does this impact the big picture? And that big picture analysis is really key because, in my experience, the incident itself, the most important thing is usually not the incident itself, right? There's a bigger business problem that needs to be solved. And so if you're responding to each individual signal in an incident, you're losing sight of the bigger business problem that needs to be addressed.
Talking about the business problem that needs to be solved, that brings up another very significant aspect of cybersecurity governance, and that is treating cybersecurity as a strategic capability, trying to align the cybersecurity capabilities with the strategic goals of the organization. An initiative that focuses on establishing cybersecurity as a strategic enabler can go a long way in getting that top management commitment that we've been talking about. Because at the end of the day, the leadership is looking to accomplish the business goals for which they have been hired. Security is kind of a pain. It's a hindrance that they have to deal with. and it comes in the way of them achieving their goals. And that's precisely why many want it to be go away magically if possible, or some other team handle it. So there, my approach has been, how about looking at security as an opportunity, whereby strengthening your systems, providing an additional layer of security to your data. You might have a leg up on your competitors, and that might help you gain more market share. And that will further incentivize investing in appropriate cybersecurity initiatives, because now you see the value. Otherwise, it seems like I'm throwing more money in a dark pit, and I don't know if I'll ever see an ROI from that. I'd rather use that money for marketing, for product development. So it's very important to bring this apparent diverse goals into an integrated goal. Because you have cybersecurity, not because security is a cool thing to do, but because it is essential to survive and thrive. So if the mindset can be suitably altered, I think the things you've been talking about, whether it's commitment, whether it's preparedness, and last but not the least, discipline, the ability to consistently follow through with the preparedness action plans and not deviate from the course. You get that extra boost, that extra support, and that makes for a win-win situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Although I frame it a little differently, because just having been in-house for such a large chunk of my career, businesses talk about profit centers and cost centers. And every business wants to maximize their profit centers. They're going to devote resources to the profit centers. They want to minimize the cost centers. Privacy and cybersecurity are cost centers. And the thing about those cost centers in particular, though, is that makes them unique among cost centers is that privacy and cybersecurity form the foundation of trust on which your profit centers rely. And so without that trust, you're not going to have customers. Your customers will leave. You will find it hard to retain the customers you have. You'll find it hard to acquire new customers. Your contract counterparties, anyone that looks to you as a vendor, they're not going to be there if they cannot trust you. And so you have to devote resources to protecting that trust, because that's what your brand is all based on, right? Your brand is how much can people trust your brand. And so if they can't trust it, it's gone. And it's how I position cybersecurity and privacy to business leaders. Yes, it's a cost center, but it is a critical cost center that you cannot do business without. And no one wants to run the risk of that headline risk of being, the next big TJ Maxx or Walmart or Target, right? They don't want to be associated with those breaches. And it's kind of this weird situation at this point. There are so many breaches constantly that I think I'm seeing businesses that are like, well, I'm going to be in the news, but I won't be in the news for very long because somebody else is going to come along, right? But your customers remember. They really do. And it's one thing if you're the only game in town, the customers don't have a choice. But in a competitive market, you don't want to run that risk. It's just not worth it.
Absolutely. You really don't want to run that risk. The reputational risk, which ultimately can jeopardize operations, you may have to go under. And assuming that it's going to go away, which unfortunately is often the approach taken by many organizations. I think that's a very short-term kind of a mindset. Let's go back to incident response leading during crisis. We talked about a lot of things. Are there any elements that you want to highlight just to provide some pointers to listeners that as they are dealing with crisis or as they are preparing for crisis situations, what are a few things they should keep in mind or they should be doing?
Yeah, I think when you're preparing for an incident, the key thing to remember is that things that have happened in the past can be useful guides in your preparation. But if all you're doing is preparing for an incident that you've already faced or that has faced someone in your industry has faced, you're just preparing for the last incident, not the next one. And so something that cyber professionals and lawyers and business leaders, we don't spend enough time thinking like the bad guys. You know, the bad guys are completely unconstrained by morals, by laws. They don't care. Their goal is to get your money, get your data, whatever it is they're looking for. And they're not limited by the things that limit the rest of us. And so we really need to break out of that and say, all right, yes, it's wrong to do this, but this is how it's going to happen. So I need to prepare for that. And that's really a kind of a paradigm that we don't use enough. We don't employ that, think like the bad guys paradigm enough. So that's really the one key thing that I would say is don't prepare for the last attack, prepare for the next one. And the next one is you really need to be creative and thinking about where that's going to come from, how it's going to impact you. And it could be a 0.1% chance that this is going to happen, but odds are that's actually what's going to happen, right? Like that 0.1% chance, that's actually the one that's going to bring you to your knees. So get ready for that. Don't just write it off as, well, it's completely unlikely to happen. Those are the ones that the bad guys are thinking, that's exactly how I want to make it happen.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. So, Josh, based on your experience of fighting fires, is there a consistent theme across organizations where you notice this weakness appearing over and over again? For instance, just to hypothetically, maybe you're seeing that there is a glaring communications glitch or a glaring, like you said, or I remember from another incident where they were frantically looking to identify who was the point of contact for the incident response teams to deal with. They had brought in an external team, but when they came in and they were looking to talk to one or two people, not everybody, they were not sure who they were. So I've come across a couple of such instances. Just curious, from your experiences, what have you seen in terms of a glaring weakness?
Yeah, I think one of the big consistencies across organizations is that at the C-suite level, you have people that generally are used to giving orders. And so when there's an incident, they all have opinions about what to do. Those opinions could be completely different. And a good C-suite will debate and disagree and then come up with a single strategy and execute that. What I've seen happen multiple times, though, is they debate, they disagree. The CEO thinks that there's a strategy and others on the C-suite don't. And so they set their teams off to do different things in different ways with different ends in mind. And that is not hard to see how that could be completely counterproductive. You've got maybe a compliance team that's talking to the regulator saying one thing. You've got an IT team that's doing something completely different. And then when the regulators start asking questions about, all right, well, prove that what you're telling us is true, and you can't because the IT team has actually done something absolutely different from what you told the regulators was going to happen. And it comes out in communications to impacted individuals too, right? We told the customers we were going to do X, but we didn't. Why didn't we do X? Right. And so that is really it's a theme that I wish wasn't true, but it is a theme that I've seen many times where, the C-suite just disagrees and they never get to that point of saying, all right, this is our strategy, period. If you disagree, fine, but keep that disagreement to yourself outside this room. And that can be completely destructive to a company and their prospects of actually getting through an incident resilient, because that you want to be able to be resilient, right? You're going to get hit. You want to get back up and keep doing business, but you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you're not acting with one voice at the C-suite level.
So true. Not only one voice, and I think you alluded to this as well, but I wanted to specifically state it. It's very important that you communicate in one voice, and the communication is as honest, as candid, and as substantive as possible. Because at the end of the day, there should be only one truth. Otherwise, you're creating more confusion. And it goes back to what you said rather beautifully a little while back. And ultimately, it all boils down to trust, building, sustaining the level of trust. And all of these actions feed into the trust platform, if I may, or the trust foundation. And so even if the C-suite official execs are disagreeing in terms of how they would approach communication or the actions, but there has to be an agreement in terms of whatever you share that should be factual, that should be consistent, for lack of a better word, should never lie to any of the stakeholders. That's never an appropriate approach, never an appropriate strategy. You can always ask for more time so you can get to the bottom of things. But I think now the regulators are requiring that organizations of a certain size respond by a certain period. So at least you're keeping the victims informed that what happened, what are you doing about it. But just going silent for a long time and expecting that it'll go away or people will forget about it, that's again not an advisable strategy or an approach. So I totally agree with you that the leadership needs to come together, get their heads in, and discuss these aspects of security governance, which actually speaks to their company's philosophy, their company's reputation, their company's values. So it's not something out of the ordinary. It's just something that has to be integrated into their way of doing business.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely correct. A couple of things that I always counsel clients on. One is that, yes, it must be honest, it must be fulsome. And along those lines, you have to think about the context in which whoever you're communicating with is getting the communication, right? If you're sending out a breach notification to a customer and it says that we had this incident 18 months ago, right? The customer is going to wonder, why am I just finding out about this now, right? So you have to think through how your communication is being received and whether you're being fulsome in your communication in the first place, right? Am I intentionally obscuring the fact that we dragged our feet for 18 months? Or is there a legitimate reason why we're only telling you about this now? And if there's a legitimate reason, explain it, right? Just lay it out. It's not going to blow back on you that, yes, this was a complicated incident and we had to spend the time and money and effort to make sure that we had it right before we went out and started telling people that their data was compromised. And so we were trying to make sure we were doing the right thing, and that took time. And the other thing that I counsel clients about is you have to have one message. It can't be we tell our employees one thing and we tell the public something else. Because, and this is shocking to a lot of folks, but when you tell your employees something, they tell everyone else, right? So if you've got more than 5 employees, you might as well post it on Facebook or X or whatever, right? Because you are putting that information out there to the public at that point. And if what you're putting out to employees is different from what you're saying to regulators or what you're saying to customers, someone's going to notice. And that is going to make you look really terrible. Even if what you're putting out there could arguably be seen as consistent, right? You don't want to be arguing about the nuance of what we said internally versus externally. You're already on the defensive at that point. You don't want to be there, right? You need a consistent message that you're putting out to any audience that cares to listen to it.
Excellent point. In fact, one last question that I have before we'll wrap up things, and it goes back to communication. Now, it's a personal perspective, I guess. When you're reading a legal document, it can get very complicated quickly. When I receive a 1-page long email from my employer, let's say, where I could tell that the intent is to cover all bases, I don't even care to read. And I know that it is being sent because it needs to be sent to everybody. And I respect that part of, that's one of the things to do. However, from an effectiveness standpoint, from a transparency standpoint, there needs to be another version that is more understandable. And by no means am I suggesting it is inconsistent. It has to come out from the master, but a more relatable version. And that needs to go out to all the stakeholders so they understand from their standpoint, whether I'm a customer, whether I'm a vendor, whether I am performing a particular function, what does this incident mean to me, or what's my role when we are trying to keep our organization safe? So you want to be on the right side of the law, but you also want to be able to explain to people. Otherwise, they lose patience, and as it is, they have enough emails to deal with. One more email, long one, they'll either hit trash or they'll just save it for later. And to that extent, the communication hasn't quite served its purpose. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I am a big advocate for keeping it simple. Whether it's contracts or notifications or whatever it is, I really abhor using 50 words when 5 will suffice. And I think you hit on a really key point there. Just because you need one message, that doesn't mean that every audience needs to get the entire 100% message, right? There are things that your vendors care about that your customers don't. There are things that your customers care about that the regulators don't. So the key here is to create a single message and then pull from that for the different audiences and make sure that because you're pulling from a single message, you're automatically getting some consistency across audiences. You just need to make sure that whatever you're pulling out is a fulsome explanation. It's not, the customers don't need to know how it's impacting your vendor relationships, but there are parts of that they do need to know. And so it's about being clear. It's about being consistent. It's using plain language, not trying to use fancy legal or technical language. Like, most people don't know what any of that means, and they don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them. So use language that is easily accessible. Say, hey, we had an incident. We didn't have port 3312 was exploited. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, that is irrelevant information. What matters is you had an incident, you've addressed it, sealed whatever gaps there were, you've learned from it, you've made improvements. Yes, there was an impact. We're sorry about it. We're moving on, and we're going to do a better job. That's really the message that you need to convey to maintain that trust. And I keep going back to it, but that is really the name of the game, is maintaining the trust that your customers have put in you, so that they will continue coming to you and they'll continue, buying your products or your services. That's really what it's all about. If you can suffer a massive incident, and it's important to remember here, company that suffers a massive incident is the victim of a crime. You're not shooting yourself. You're not self-inflicted. You are the victim of a crime, and you need to approach it like that. And you need to recognize that your customers are also victims of that crime, and that you're in it together. You're on the same team. You have the same goal. And as long as the company is acting as though the customer is the most important part of this incident, the company's going to get through just fine. And the customers are going to be happy with how the company handled the incident, and they're going to stick with that company. The company starts getting defensive and saying, it wasn't really our fault. We didn't really do it. That doesn't play well. And customers don't want to see that. Customers don't want to get blamed. They don't want to feel like, well, if you didn't learn anything from this, what's to stop it from happening again? That's where companies really start tripping over themselves and losing customers. You want to retain those customers. The only way to do it is to maintain that trust and just be open and honest and clear about what happened and why it happened, how you've learned from it, what you're doing better going forward, and why you're still worthy of those customers.
Extremely well said. Thank you so much. I'm just going to add another word there. And that is, it's really about caring. You really have to care. Not only do you have to care about your products, about your business, you have to care about your customers, about the other stakeholders. If you're driven by true care, that's going to make you do all the right things. You will ask the right questions. You'll inform yourself to be able to ask the right questions. So it boils down to having that commitment that I'm going to offer the best possible security that I can. And to be able to do that, I will leverage every possible resource, reach out to experts. So if you put in the effort and you stay on top, good things are bound to happen. We can never be perfect. We can never guarantee there'll never be a breach. There's no such guarantees. But like Josh said, we can definitely prepare at a high level and sustain that preparedness. And people will be able to see that, whether it's your employees, whether it's your customers, whether it's your vendors, they will be able to see it'll come through very clearly. So then you're not having to save face, which often is the case. Post-incident, we are installing this, we are implementing this, and we are doing that. All of a sudden, you're on overdrive. You're trying to inform the whole world all the great things you're doing. But that can also get perceived as, now they have woken up. Where were they? So if you start doing it before anything has happened and you are meticulous in your approach, well guided by experts such as Josh, good things are bound to happen. Anyhow, it's always the guest who has the last word. Any final thoughts?
Sure. I just appreciate the opportunity. I love having this conversation. It's obviously something that's near and dear to my heart and I'm passionate about. But the thing that I guess the parting word that I like to offer is that you don't need a technical background to deal with a cyber incident. Because fundamentally, it's about people. It's about the customers. It's about your employees. It's about your leadership team. It's about people. And you don't need a technical background to understand that. And as long as you're keeping the people in your focus, you're going to get through it. You're going to get through it just fine. You need the technical support. There are definitely technical issues that are a part of every cyber incident. But fundamentally, it's a business problem. And the business problem is a people problem. And so that's the real key to it to me, is that keep the people in mind and we can solve it. We can get through this.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. It's been truly a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate it.
The information contained in this podcast is for general guidance only. The discussants assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantee of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness. The opinions and recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the discussants and not of any organization.